true. And I'm not, no, it wasn't unhealthy. It's just,
No, it just you made the right move.
this is how we're starting our life.
I'm gonna mute every time I have a coughing fit. So if I go blank for 2 seconds, that's why.
Yeah. Alessia might have bronchitis. I might have like mold exposure in this apartment. I've had a weird dry cough like that too, literally since I got here. And at first I was like, change in the weather. And now I'm like, all right, I should be acclimated by now. So like, what's dusty up in here? But I have been enjoying, speaking of dusty, like my current favorite part of being single, besides just like having all of my own time and energy, is living in such a clean space. That is such a form of self-care and self-love to me, is like keeping your living spaces tidy. And I'm not like an OCD clean freak. Like nothing in here is going to be like organized by alphabetical order on a bookshelf or like color coded necessarily in my closet. Like I'm not there. That doesn't give me joy. But like every single sheet, towel, surface, dish, clothing article in here is clean. And it's like, it stays clean when it's just me. And it is like, that is seriously, this, it's just those like simple joys. And I like bought myself a little plant. And yeah, so for the audience that's just tuned in, we're going to be talking a little bit how dieting and your fitness journey is a little bit like relationships, but it's so fitting because I'm no longer in a relationship. I'm newly single. However, this analogy still applies and I still stand by this, but if you are also experiencing breakup season, because that is a real thing, Venus retrograde hit everyone. And I know so many people going through breakup. If that's you, girl, just take it day by day, clean your space, enjoy having so much of it to yourself. Again, like that's one of those things that I'm like, really enjoying just like having things be really clean and way cleaner than they were when I shared my apartment with a man. So,
and like in your systematic order, or like where something is when you go to find it, you're like, oh, yes, where I put the towels are still there. Like you go to grab a towel, it's not there. There's something too about decluttering your mind and like you said, like trying to keep busy and things like that, but it's a byproduct of decluttering what's going on in here. And like you can't have a decluttered mind if everything around you is cluttered too. It's like a reflection of what's going on in your head.
totally. We've talked about that before with the like how you do one thing is how you do everything. I'm like, I guarantee you, if my like planner is filled out and I'm time blocking and my apartment is clean, like most things in my life are in like a little bit of order. It's when I'm not putting any to-do lists together, my laundry's everywhere, like the rest of my life is probably also in shambles. So that was like why when we talked about kind of getting out of a rut, one of the first things I said was like your physical space, change your physical space, whether that's reorganizing or making it clean or like rearranging your furniture or whatever it is, like change the energy in your space and keep it clean. And that's a really good way to get through a rut. But what we wanted to talk about today, since we are sort of off topic here, but I hope you guys love just like, it's just like Monday night hangouts.
Yeah, we're going to bring it
back. I feel like I'm just hanging out with my friends, having a chat. Is, something that a lot of our clients have expressed to us over the course of their time working with us. Because most people come to us wanting to lose body fat. They want to do a dieting phase. They want to be in a deficit. They want to go through a fat loss phase, whatever you want to call it. But oftentimes, and you know this if you've worked with us, that is not the first place that we start with new clients. And that is for a very specific reason. And something that one of my clients who just got married, when we finally got to her wedding cut, she started with me back in November. Her wedding just happened in August, but she was like, okay, I know I need to start sooner rather than later. I want to give myself enough time. And when we actually finally got to the dieting portion, the deficit, she was like, all right, I'm ready. We're kicking this off on this day. And we did it. And a couple weeks in, she was like, I just expected this to be harder. Like, I expected to suffer more. I expected to feel shittier. And we talked a little bit about why. And, I think it's super important to say, like, if you're doing this in a healthy way, just like if you're in a healthy, stable, secure adult relationship, you know, you've worked through a lot of the kinks, you have the tools in your tool belt, you have the communication, you have the self-awareness, you have the, you know, willingness to compromise. It's kind of the same thing with your fitness journey and dieting, in that, like, if you're doing it right, it shouldn't feel extreme and chaotic and horrible. There
Right.
shouldn't be those insane fluctuations and ups and downs. And I think that's what so many people are used to, is kind of like a toxic relationship with their own dieting history.
I was gonna say their own dieting journey and where they came from. And like we talk a lot about this too, is sometimes people be like, how long do I need to be in a reverse diet for? It's like, well, if you were dieting before that, sometimes we'll look at that and be like, okay, for as long as you were dieting, you should reverse diet for that amount of time, if not longer. But we're not talking about the mathematics here. It's more of like, where has your mindset been this whole time? Have you been doing 17 different fad diets? Or we have a lot of clients that come to us like, oh, I was eating 1,200 calories, or I did keto and then I did this and I did that. And it's like, you didn't get the results that you want, but you feel like you put in all this work and energy was expended. And then you come to the table with a reverse diet, or just like building sustainable habits is really what we do. We have a whole live on like, what are the 5 to 7 things that we give clients when we first get started, right? And sometimes they're like, oh, well, this kind of feels like simple. Like, you're telling me to drink more water, you're telling me to like move more, instead of it being this extreme thing. We do that, show them like this is sustainable. And so when you go into the calorie deficit, you're only changing like 1 or 2 things, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about like some examples of what that might look like, but it shouldn't be this overhaul of all of the habits that you built up until this point and then like negating that and doing something completely different. I think people are expecting it to be this completely different journey that they're going to be on because they're so used to that chaoticness. Like relationships, you go from one toxic relationship to another, you actually meet someone who has not those qualities, and you're like, what's wrong with you? Like, when are you going to turn? When are you going to be crazy?
Like, this should be harder. Why
Yeah.
is it easy?
Yeah,
Something
why
must
is
be missing
why
here.
does that feel good? This is too good to be true.
Literally, I've definitely experienced that in my last relationship, where I was like, I think something's missing. And then it was like, is something missing, or is the what's missing just the like stress and anxiety of trying to, like, like just the constant like starting over all the time. And that's what it is with, clients and people in general who haven't developed, like, nobody wants, like, slow and sustainable isn't sexy, right? So a lot of people haven't tried that truly. I think so many people come to us saying, I've tried everything and nothing works. I'm like, well, what have you tried? And it's like 1,200 calories, like liquid diet, it's, 75 hard right off the bat. And it's like, okay, well, all those things are extreme. And we're not saying, like, lifestyle change and body change is effortful. It is requires hard work, without a doubt. We're not saying like, oh, it should just be easy, but it should be much easier and more successful if you've spent the time kind of setting yourself up for success. And most people skip past that part because it takes longer. We typically have all of our clients start with either a maintenance phase or a reverse diet phase, where we spend time kind of laying the bricks and laying the foundation. I mean, like, think about how much easier dieting becomes. We were talking about this morning with, like, a client who's never tracked macros before, doesn't go to the gym regularly, drinks 40 ounces of water a day. It's like, if we put that person who's never tracked a macro before into 12, 13, 14, 15, a restrictive calorie amount when they don't even know how to track macros correctly in the first place, like, of course it's going to feel impossible. And of course it's going to feel exciting right out the gate and then feel super unsustainable. And then they feel unsuccessful. Like, we are trying to set you up for things to be easy. Again, like, relationships require hard work, and you gotta be willing to put the work in and put the effort in, for sure. But if you're doing things the right way, it shouldn't feel extreme, and it shouldn't feel, again, it'll feel effortful. You're still gonna have to, and you're just gonna have to make sacrifices, but it shouldn't feel like this massive
Right.
overhaul, right?
And I think too, going back to wait, I just lost my train of thought. This keeps happening. So we'll talk.
We're gonna call this pregnancy brain every time that it happens, whether or not it happened before, irrelevant. If it happens now, it's pregnancy brain.
No, I'm mad. What were you just saying? Oh my God.
I don't
Uh,
even know.
Coming into it, not, oh, okay, I know what I was gonna say. Oh my God, this is so crazy. It's like my brain's like moving faster than my mouth is able to talk. So also, if you put somebody in, yeah, if you put somebody in a calorie deficit initially, or you put yourself in a calorie deficit initially, you probably aren't actually in a calorie deficit if you're not tracking correctly or taking weekends off or not tracking alcohol or whatever, like common things that we see happen. And now 4 weeks go by and you go to like get on the scale or do your progress photos and you're like I'm doing mentally, I'm doing all this work and
Yeah.
I'm not getting any of the results that I thought. So it's either like you give up and you quit or you go more extreme and you try to go harder. And instead of just building up that foundation first, and the reason this actually came up is because each of us had a client who said to us, like, hey, so I feel like I'm just doing the same thing, just like less, a little less food, but even that's not really that hard. And am I doing it right? And it's like, that's exactly how
That's
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 how
how it's supposed to feel. It shouldn't feel like you're, again, that's the benefit of setting yourself up by not jumping into something
Right.
extreme. Because the thing I have to remind people of all the time is like, just because you're doing low carb doesn't mean you're in a calorie deficit. Just because you're doing 75 hard doesn't mean you're in a calorie deficit. Just because you run every single day doesn't mean you're in a calorie deficit. So at the end of the day, if your goal is fat loss, the only way to create fat loss is to create a calorie deficit. The only way to create a calorie deficit is to eat less and move more. Those are your only options, right? So knowing that and simplifying that, it's like, if we can set you up to already be consistent in the gym, already eat enough protein, already eat enough micronutrients, right? So that your insides are functioning well. When we get to that point where we're saying like, all right, we have now flipped the switch, it is calorie deficit, it is fat loss time. The only thing that's going to change if you're doing it right is eating a little bit less and moving a little bit more, and then continuing to increase that as you need to. It should, again, because like you can do all of the extreme diets in the world, it doesn't mean you're in a calorie deficit. I did Whole30, didn't mean I was in a calorie deficit. I actually did all kinds of crazy shit. None of it meant I was in a calorie deficit, at least for long enough to have anything happen. Right.
Right.
So you can call these diets whatever you want, pick something extreme because it feels sexier. It's like, oh, this is going to change my life because it is a complete 180 from what I'm doing now. You probably won't sustain that long enough for your calorie deficit to do anything if you do it that way.
Exactly. And to your point with that too, it's like, okay, not everybody, like this is specifically if you're looking to like change body composition, lose fat, right? There's like right now I'm eating completely different than I normally do, but I'm not expecting to get like calorie deficit results, right? Like also making sure that what your goals align with the actions that you're taking in the beginning as well. So if you're like, oh, I'm not doing this for fat loss, I'm just doing it to eat healthier, that's a completely different thing than wanting to change body composition or lose weight or change the way you look, change the way you feel, change your relationship with food. Like having that goal aligned or set first and then setting yourself up like, what is the action that I need to take? And it's interesting too, because when we do this with clients, normally we'll increase a little bit of their activity. But again, we're not sending them into a situation where it's not something that they would be able to sustain. Like we have a client who's like, I travel a lot. I can't necessarily do the exact cardio you gave me. Can we manipulate this to fit my lifestyle? And it's like, yes, right? Like that's going back to relationships. Like you have to be able to be flexible with your goals, unless you're training for like a bodybuilding competition or
Right.
something very, very extreme. Everything that you're doing should be able to be sustained in your lifestyle. Not saying, now on the flip side of that, I had another client say like, hey, how do I like drink the same amount of alcohol I was drinking before in a calorie deficit? And it's like, well, you don't, because you have to consume something less. I would rather you consume less alcohol than less food. Also, I would just rather save more room for like chips and dip. Like that's just me. Like at a bar, I'm like, I'll take the chips and the guac. You guys can have the drinks. But there has to be trade-offs, but it doesn't mean that it has to be a 180 from what you were doing. So it shouldn't feel like I have to revamp everything that I've known for the last 8, 12, 6 months, whatever you've been doing, up until now.
With the bodybuilding example, because I have competed, it's like everyone on the outside who doesn't know the difference between protein and carbs yeah, to them, that would be impossible. And everyone's like, oh, I never, I couldn't have the discipline. I could never, XYZ and do what you do. But even in the situation of bodybuilding, it's like, you probably spent at least 2 years prior to flipping the switch on, I'm prepping for a show. All of those were already your habits, right? And that's why it's easier for bodybuilders to be bodybuilders, is because, like, yeah, it is extreme. That is an extreme example, but I still spent, a really solid amount of time tracking macros. Like, I was tracking macros regardless of whether or not I was competing. I was going to the gym 5 days a week, regardless of whether or not I was competing, so like, yeah, it required an extra extreme level of effort and discipline on my part, but I had already built the fact that I hit 140 grams of protein every single day, drank a gallon of water every single day, went to the gym habitually. Like, those things would have been impossible to implement at the start of a prep, having never done them before. And it's the same thing with our clients in just less extreme dieting phases, right? It's like, if you can get yourself with our help for 8 weeks, 12 weeks to a place where, again, your water is consistent, your steps are consistent, your routines in the gym are consistent, your food is consistent, you don't have a hard time, you're not struggling to hit your macros because it's a sustainable, comfortable amount of food for you. All that has to change when you get to the, like, I'm now losing fat, is, again, like, the volume of food, and then like probably a slight uptick as far as like your activity levels are concerned, whether that's intentional cardio or whether that's just more steps. My client that just, got ready for her wedding was like, I feel like in the past, in my, like, past life before working with Limitless, when I would do a dieting phase, it was like 7 days a week of cardio, trying to do HIIT every single day. And I would set my calories at like 12 to 1300. So I just expected to suffer more. And I was like, well, that's because your relationship with food and exercise prior to this has been toxic. Much like, again, when you're used to insecure attachment, toxic relationships, people who are emotionally unavailable, whatever, it's like, you kind of expect to come so hot out the gate with those butterflies. By the way, that's anxiety. Literally ignore those. Come out so hot out the gate. Maybe you're getting love bombed, you're getting obsessed, you're so excited about this person only for it to crash and burn. It's the same shit that you're going to be doing with your dieting if you don't go about it in a healthy and sustainable way. And I think most people are looking for healthy and sustainable results, both in a relationship and in their body composition, but going about it in a very unhealthy and chaotic and extreme way, and wondering why, like, the results don't come from that. It's like, those are different approaches that result in different things. I'm sure we've all had the experience. I know I have, of like, all right, I'm going to go really hard and start this extreme calorie deficit. I'm going to go to the gym every single day, even though you haven't been going more than 2 days a week at any point before that. And again, we just like come out the gate so hot that we end up crashing and burning. And then we tell ourselves, there's just no one out there for me. Or, we tell ourselves like, oh, I just, I've tried everything and nothing works. It's like, well, you've tried everything that isn't meant to work long-term. Have you ever tried doing things in a slow and steady? Like, I always ask my clients, I'm like, okay, you want to do this. Can you see yourself doing that forever? No? Okay. Well, then we probably shouldn't use that as our approach to lose body fat. Again, if you're already hitting your steps, hitting the gym, hitting your protein, making balanced meals out of whole foods, like, no, if that never changes, just simply the calorie amount goes up or down and the cardio amount goes up and down, like, that's probably something you could see yourself doing forever once those habits are in place. Now, no, if you're just starting, you're like, what's a macro? Sure, that doesn't sound like something you can do forever right now because you don't know how. But that's why we start with 8 to 12 weeks of like building the foundation, so that when we tell our clients like, okay, it's time to diet, and we give them their first deficit macros, they're like, that's it? That's all that's changing? Like, it's supposed to be not easy, but it's supposed to not feel extreme if you want your results to not be extreme and you want them to be lasting. Oh, you're still muted.
There we go. It's just the transition into the next phase, right? So like something that you had said to before, when you spend those 8 to 12 weeks just building up that foundation, it's also going to show you where some of your weaknesses and like your strengths are. For some people, it's like they're super consistent with going to the gym. Like, I'm loving the training, I'm loving this, kind of having a hard time hitting my fiber, kind of having a hard time hitting my protein. It gives you a chance to like regulate and balance out, like, okay, this comes easy to some people. Like I struggled with drinking water. It's like the simplest thing. And I'm like, dude, why can't I just get this? Like, and then I realized if I was trying to tackle all of those habits at once in a short amount of time with the expectation of getting a result, you can't focus on those little things that you need to do over time. So like in that foundational period, you'll find like, oh, I need to do better at this. This is where I struggle. My schedule's crazy. So I know now that I would have to plan ahead for my food. You can't wing a calorie. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't really. Like if you want optimal results, you can't wing a calorie deficit and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to start this now, and realizing my life is chaotic. I eat like off the food truck at work, right? Like all these things that would probably be hindering your progress, you're going to find those things out in the beginning. So then when you go into the next phase, you still might know like, okay, I probably still am going to have to put a little bit more effort here, but it's not as overwhelming as if it would have been when you have all of these new goals and then this huge expectation of this like massive result to come after it too.
100%. We were talking about that kind of like, it's kind of like doing the prerequisite courses before you get to the advanced courses. Like if you have ever tried to take calculus, like I did at a major university, like I did, after transferring and not taking a math class for 3 years, like I did, you're probably going to fail like I did. Okay.
Right.
I dropped the class twice because I hadn't taken algebra since I was, 15. And then I tried to jump into calculus because I needed it for my major once I switched to UT. And I was like, in what world? This is a different language. Like, how am I expected to know any of this stuff? And it's kind of the same concept, right? Like,
and it doesn't make you it's not like, oh, because you were incapable of it.
Yeah.
Like you're not smart. It's just
have the foundations.
Right. You didn't have the foundation. So when they start bringing up terms, you're like, I don't really actually know what that means, kind of thing. So it's just the whole point of us bringing this up is that also too, like if you've ever, I know I used to do this before I really understood what eating for muscle growth or eating for calorie deficit meant. I would Google like foods to eat in a calorie deficit, right?
Yeah.
Actually what you're eating doesn't matter. It's the swaps that you can make. So if your maintenance is 2000 calories and you're like, okay, I'm going to cut down to 17 or 1600, you could literally still eat the same exact kind of foods you were eating. Just, and we talked about this morning, like maybe having half of the amount of oatmeal and including some more berries, right? Like doing those trade-offs. Swapping out pasta for your lunch or doing half the amount of pasta and adding in broccoli. You actually still feel like you're eating the same amount of food, but calorically you're eating less. And then as you do that for a week or two, it just becomes second nature to like look at that amount of food and go like, oh, okay, not extreme, not food focused, not creating this craze of like always being hungry, always thinking about food. You were doing the exact same thing you were doing before, just taking really small swaps of like, oh, trading your peanut butter for a PB2, like really simple things that can just flip flop, and it should be almost seamless. Again, not saying it's not going to be hard, or maybe it's not something you're going to have to think about more. Like, yeah, probably can't have 8 drinks over, the course of 10 hours, maybe cut that down to like 4, see how you do with that. But it's just trimming down what you were doing before, but that foundation is still always built.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, yeah, it might sound simple to us and you're like, how would I know to swap this or that? Again, it's because you probably haven't established those foundations. Like for me, when I'm in a dieting phase versus not a dieting phase, I'm like, okay, I have more egg whites versus whole eggs if I'm trying to cut calories, but my meals look the same. I have 2 pieces of toast if I'm not dieting. I have 1 piece of toast if I'm dieting. Like imagine if it was that simple for you to lose weight, that all you did was like change the volume of the foods you're eating and like maybe go on an extra walk on your lunch break to add your steps, maybe put 1 more, cycling class or something into your rotation. Like, obviously it's not that easy if you've never done it, but it is that simple if you can build the habits. And I think that that's what our program and what we do with coaching is so focused on, is like building you to a place that like once you stop working with us, you now know, okay, these things are just part of my life. This is habitual. I don't start over every time I come back from vacation. I don't blow it out every time I don't, I don't track a meal, or don't know the macros, because I kind of have like a decent idea of where my proteins and fats are coming from. So it's like not a big deal. Like if your life looked like that and you just knew which kind of nods on the dimmer to turn up or down to lose body fat, like how much less stressful would your life be? And again, like that's kind of how it's supposed to be with like a healthy, sustainable relationship, right? Is like, all right, I have all these tools in my tool belt. I've kind of done all this work on myself. I have this foundation, but I'm fully aware I'm going to have to put effort into this and like pull out different tools at different times to achieve different results. But like ultimately, I'm going to have different efforts for different seasons, and it shouldn't feel like I'm on a roller coaster with either of these relationships,
When you come back to that, because, and I love what you said, relationships are not linear either. So there's, even in healthy relationships, you're going to have those ebbs and flows, but the trajectory should be going up. Okay, if we're talking calorie deficit, it's going down, but
you should stay the same.
right. And then, so what's happening is like you're building off the last foundational like structure that you built. It's like, okay, the next part is we're moving in together. If you have a shitty foundation already, being in the same household probably not going to be the best thing.
True, that's such a great analogy.
And it's like, well, let's get engaged. It's like, okay, so now you live together. Now you have this like commitment, and you're planning a wedding, and you don't like each other, and you don't know how to communicate, and like you're trying to plan a wedding. Like all of those things have to build on each other. But when you have that strong foundation, you can always come back to that. So same thing. And I love what you said, because we, especially in the summertime, we had so many clients who were like, I'm traveling for a whole week. I love that like everyone's going to Europe and like taking 2 weeks off. I'm like, love it. Okay. Like,
hot girl summer, we love it.
And it's like, okay, let's talk about all the things that you've done in the last couple weeks. Let's pick 2 or 3 to just bring with you overseas.
Yep.
Doesn't mean you need to bring a scale with you. Doesn't mean you need to do any of that. When you come home, you don't feel like I threw away everything I knew, and now I have to, and now I'm feeling like start over. I remember if we talked about this on our last live, I think I just said it to you about the all or nothing, right? Like that's part of that chaotic kind of mindset. Most people that think they're in the all or nothing is like, they're just in the nothing. They're just doing the nothing part of it. So same thing is like, you don't need to do these extreme things when you're in a calorie deficit to be in the all, to ultimately like end up doing nothing because you're burnt out, or you aren't getting fast enough results, or you think it should feel harder than what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I loved to your relationship analogy. Like, okay, if you don't already have good communication and trust and, all of this stuff, and then it's like, okay, let's get married or have a baby or something to like save the, like go extreme and say, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. If that's you, don't do it.
I don't know. It's, I feel like we could have a whole conversation about
It's like, if all of your meals right now come from fast food and you've never stepped foot in a gym, and then you decide that you are going to do 75 hard and compete in a marathon next month, like how?
Right. And then that's also training your brain to think that that's the only way you'll ever get results. The only way
your brain to like think that you're never going to be successful because you're doing things that are like literally setting you up to fail. And that just reinforces to you, yep, I knew it. I can't get results. I can't do this.
Right. Oh, I hate that feeling. Like, who wants to feel that? Guys, would love to know if any of you resonate with this, because Shelby and I were talking earlier this morning of just like where we came from with our history of like needing to finish our plates, and like we were like the friend that was like, you can eat that like off of your plate, or
yes,
how are you not finishing that, and things like that. And again, everybody comes to the table with the same thing as for relationships, right? Like everybody comes to the table with their own history and baggage. And so that will also come out when you are working through the sustainable habits. It's almost like you're like healing through the journey of doing it, because you'll recognize like, oh, I used to like binge eat. Now that I have these macros and they're still actually pretty flexible, I don't feel like I have to like eat the whole sleeve of Oreos. I can have like 4 or 5, like, oh good, had my Oreos after dinner, and like can walk away from it. You can still apply that rule and that healing and that habit that you built in the maintenance part to a calorie deficit.
Yeah, 100%. I want to know too, if anybody else is like, if you're feeling this conversation, if you, mostly we were talking this morning about being in like the happy plate club. Like, why was that a thing? Like, why did I have to make a happy plate before I was allowed to leave the table?
Yes.
Let
Like,
me
why did I need to finish my food? I'm like, it destroyed me for the rest of my life. I'm feeling like I had to finish my meal. And yeah, maybe we should do a whole live on like food psychology and just where
Yeah.
like habits as children or like parents that did things as children. Like my mom was very big on like the good or food, bad or good or bad food. There we go. My brain is, it's 7:30. The brain starts shutting down right about now.
That's what you said. You're like, I'm good till about 6 or 6:30. And it's like, well,
I literally started like taking notes because I was like, I don't want to forget what I'm gonna say. But like that's a whole other thing we can talk about too, is like how you go in, your mindset going into stuff has so much to do with it, but sometimes it's not always your fault, like why you know what you know or why you don't know what you know too. So I feel like we could talk about this forever, but
we could talk about everything forever. I'm like, I have so many more ideas now. Let's keep going. But
big topic.
yeah, that's probably all we want to talk about for tonight. It's just like, if you're feeling like it's not hard enough, it might be because you're doing something right and you took the time to do it the right way. If you're feeling like every attempt that you have made at dieting feels impossible, extreme, super painful, and it's a struggle, might be because, you know, we haven't gone about things in the most healthy and sustainable way up to this point. So that's maybe something you haven't tried. So let us know in the comments if this conversation hit home for you. And if you have any questions for us, always send us a DM.
Love it. Thanks, guys.
Good night.